It being now 7 o'clock and a quorum is present, I, Michael P. Marnick, the Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals of the Town of Orleans, call this regular meeting of the Zoning Board to order. Present with me are Messrs. Tom Bois and Mulligan. Also present is the Board Secretary, Amber Dauphiné, and circulated to the board were the minutes of the last two meetings, and we should entertain whether those minutes should be approved and adopted and therefore filed.
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. And opposed? Is there a correction, John?
No, it's just a question from my edification. I noticed though that basically if somebody recuses himself, they have to leave the room.
Yes.
And I am wondering why that's the situation, because you're still a voter in town, and why couldn't you participate in a meeting?
You know, George, you raised that question yourself with me,
Well-
I think, because you've had occasion to do it. That's been our custom, George, and
Except there was an instance when Mr. Mulligan declared himself
Citizen.
less
That's
than
right.
impartial.
That's
And
right.
sat in the audience, which I
So,
questioned at the time.
No, I did not, let's get this very clear. I did not say myself less than impartial. What I said was my proximity, I think, precludes me from voting. I was completely impartial, or I wasn't completely impartial, I did say in favor. But I did not, I feel very strongly that there's no need for you to leave the room. You are a citizen of the town, you're entitled to hear what goes on. I don't know why that custom has sprung up.
well, I think we'll abandon it.
I have a rationale, I'm sorry, I
That's
have a
all right.
rationale for perpetuating it,
Okay.
which is the reason that I thought, I've never seen anything written or stated about this, but the reason I thought that people recused themselves was because they had a sufficient personal interest or involvement such that they might not be truly impartial, so therefore they couldn't sit on the board.
Okay.
And in as much as they couldn't
Or
sit
the
on...
perception, or the perception.
Let me just,
Yeah.
fine, I'm fine with that. The perception or the reality of, and under those circumstances, in an obligation of integrity to the board, we recluse ourselves. Has anybody had information visits, et cetera, you say? Once having recused oneself, inasmuch as they're sitting there with deliberating board members and presenters here, it's hard for me to feel that their influence is not felt. And under those circumstances, I would propose that such a person recuse themselves from the room. But I don't feel so strongly I'm going to the mat on this, but that's my position.
That's a personal integrity issue, and if that's how the person feels, he can still sit in the audience and basically not speak if that's his choice. But I still think that he has the right as a citizen, independent of the board, he's not on it if he recuses himself, to speak and address the issue if he so chooses.
I disagree, but
Okay.
Let me just say something further. I think that it's selling this board very short to think that someone's going to feel pressure because one of our members has recused himself and is sitting in the hall.
as you said, it's a matter of appearance of impropriety.
No, the appearance of impropriety is why you might set, if you're a neighbor and you really don't care what goes on in this one, you don't have an opinion, but the appearance that you might, you recuse yourself.
Correct.
But that's a different issue. What I think you're saying is that if you feel that you have some issues that requires you to recuse yourself, if you stay in the room, one, the board is going to try to guess what your position is, and two, they're going to feel some pressure to vote one way or the other because of that. Which is really selling the board short, to think
I
that...
think these are not my conclusions, sir. These are
Well, you-
not my conclusions.
You said that the sitting of someone there who recused himself would unduly influence them.
Could.
Well, that's
Could.
selling the board very short.
Well, I apologize for selling the board short, and in addition to that,
I have enough
you
confidence in my
raised,
fellow members to
in
know that
addition to that, you raised the question of the appearance.
the appearance is what leads you to recuse yourself, not the appearance
of a
of...
conflict, not
Yeah.
the appearance in a meeting.
Yeah, the appearance of a
I agree with
conflict.
Mr. Mulligan 100%.
It-
I've been going to
And
meetings.
not only do you not have to recuse yourself, you recuse yourself, but you can sit in the meeting and you can comment as a citizen?
No, I didn't say comment.
Did this gentleman say comment as a
I-
citizen?
I disagree there.
Well, let's get clear on it. I don't care a whole lot. I just would like to be clear on it and consistent. Honest to God, I don't care a lot. I'd like to be clear and consistent.
You would see, may I, curious.
I don't know, you have to ask the,
You can just identify
Mark
yourself.
Ojo, I was a former planning board member for a long time. It's a curious thing. If you're a neighbor of the petitioner, I think you have a right to speak against the issue.
Absolutely.
In which case, you would step away from the table and stay in the room. It's an interesting discussion.
I would be hard pressed to ignore the testimony of a neighbor who excused themselves from this side of the room to sit over there. You didn't speak that night, I don't.
I did,
Yeah.
but I spoke because I was
I-
hot at being charged with unethical behavior by staying in the room.
well, you weren't charged with unethical behavior, sir.
What was the implication?
Again, that's your perception. I apologize if that's what you felt.
That is how I felt.
Well, it was not correct. It was that it's not, it was unique occurrence in my experience on this board. Up until your presence in the room, no person who recused themselves from this meeting ever sat in the meeting. So it was unique to me, and that informed my comment as well.
Do you think that the failure to excuse the presence of a board member who felt that there was a conflict from the room would make the decision of the board subject to attack, Mr. Dobb? That's the
You have to
question.
rephrase that for me.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Michael.
Okay. Would the ultimate decision of the board be subject to attack if a member, having excused themselves from considering a case, sat in the room and even made a statement?
Well, no, I think there's a distinction here. I'm hearing
Okay.
that now, that there's a distinction between making a statement and sitting in the room.
Sitting in the room, I think.
I would defer in sitting in the room,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
I
think that-
defer.
Yeah, I think
But on making a statement, absolutely not. What's your view on that, sir?
I think what Mark Norjo said is, if you are an abutter,
You have the right.
I
a
think-
direct abutter, you've been notified by certified mail, you obviously have the right. You're doing the important thing by refusing yourself because you have a conflict.
You have a financial interest in an action. You have a personal relationship with the presenter, their lawyer, their architect, their anything. Do you have an obligation to recuse yourself in those circumstances?
Yes.
Do you have a right to comment as a citizen?
I'd be leery of doing it
I
myself.
sure would.
Well, it certainly wouldn't be appropriate, I see that. I think we'll deal with that as it comes up, but my present thinking is that first, we would, as always, we do not generally, I don't generally inquire into the reasons that a member would ask to be excused from considering a particular case. That's really, and no one has called the board on that kind of decision. My thinking generally is, it isn't the public's business what the reason for excusing. But once the board has been declared to be impartial, then I see no reason why an excused member cannot observe. Then we'll take the question of whether a comment is to be received and whether it's the appropriateness of the excused member making a comment. We'll see what happens.
I'm comfortable with that. How did this come up anyhow?
I asked the
Tonight.
question.
Well, because the minutes have now been, they're more detailed. And they did reflect that a member was excused and then returned, so that the minutes actually disclosed the drama and flow of the meeting. And now I think the minutes have always disclosed who is present. And I think that for archival purposes, having the statement, as you have indicated, in your draft, who is absent, is appropriate. Or, yeah, absent or excused, because that shows the composition of the board on that particular night.
And for voting, too.
Yes,
Who's
yes.
here and not.
So could I just add the unnecessary comment that if there's any, in response to your earlier question, failure to excuse oneself when there is the potential of a challenge later is disrespectful to the board.
Oh, yes.
Okay?
Oh, yes. That goes right to the integrity of the board. We all know that.
Thank you.
Very well. The minutes were, by unanimous vote, were accepted. A sidelight, town meeting and special town meeting ended. It took 2 nights to do it, but at the tag end, I don't know, just, I noted with, there was 3 or 4 zoning, I would call them generically zoning articles, and Article 58, which was really, really deep in the town meeting's business, amended that troubling inclusion of the FEMA maps.
Oh,
Oh, you weren't there last night?
no.
All right.
First night. I guess.
So what was deleted from that definition of buildable upland was any reference to the FEMA flood zone, 100-year base flood elevation. So we're going to deal, as someone from the Conservation Commission was concerned whether zoning board or the town would be ignoring floodplains. Absolutely not. That's always going to be with us. So, and we
But it's
would,
been removed from the definition of a buildable uplands?
that's right. That will always be part of it, because that was, well, it's not always, but it is now.
Who put that in?
The planning board chose to because of comments they received from you,
Yeah.
and they realized it was a hardship.
No, that was truly your encouragement, and I brought it to the zoning
That's good.
bylaw task force, and then, thank you, Mr. Tom. Then, in the middle of the winter,
Yeah.
the planning board, on February 26th, as a matter of fact, had a public hearing. And before that, I called a special meeting of the zoning board to discuss our position and whether I could, or any of us could, represent the position of the zoning board to the planning board, and therefore to the town and the public. And there was pretty much a consensus of opinion, but we never had, I never, or any member, received the authority to speak for the entire board. Nevertheless, I went and told the planning board that, but that there was the consensus of the board that this was troubling, and it was, we had a lawsuit over it, and there was time to move forward, and Mr. Jablin also spoke as an individual briefly, and then the process moved from there and to town meeting, and
Well done.
it was done. And so then, I don't know, I don't really know when that amendment becomes effective.
My view is that the amendment was effective at the passage of the vote at the town
Yeah, it
meeting.
says there's not a 90-day,
That's-
Doesn't it have to go before the Attorney General to be
The
approved?
Attorney General has to approve it.
oh, that's because it's zoning, all right, yeah.
I just wanted to put in the record that I spoke at the town meeting in opposition to this, and I identified myself as a zoning board of appeals
Yes.
member. And so to the extent that I spoke in that capacity, I'd like to just put on the record that I did so. I indicated that I thought the zoning board of appeals was in favor of this modification and that I was speaking as a minority voice. And I gave a couple of reasons why I felt that way, and that was it. But I just want to indicate that I did speak in opposition to
Well,
it at the meeting.
I understood your remarks to conjoin this article with the timing of another article which dealt with the reduction for accessory dwellings from the lot size being a minimum of 40,000 square feet as it is now to 30,000 square feet. And I thought that you connected those two, and
Or wished to, but I was too late in my move to move it.
so it was ruled by the town moderator. All right.
Now that we've bored the audience to tears with administrative business.
Well, what we have is a continued hearing in case number 2109. Now, this is the third night of the hearing. The problem, if I can compress it, is something like this, that the original special permit granted to New Venture Holding, which is building dwelling units on Cove Road, originally included 1A, an IA system. And that was granted some in 1918, October 1918. So what's happened since then is that the sewering of the central district has proceeded, and as a matter of fact, was funded 2 nights ago. That meant that this development would, at some point in the future, would be sewered. And the applicant seeks to be relieved from the responsibility of an IA system because of the wastefulness of installing the system. The question arose, well, suppose the sewering the hookup is on Cove Road is completed in 2 years, what would be the effect of not having the IA system, which was originally proposed and priced and included in the development, not installed, but the conventional septic. Did I correctly state the problem? I think
Very well.
that's the way I saw it. We have had,
If I may, Mr. Marnick, I don't want to change anything that's going on, but I do have to let you know, I'm going to have to request this to be continued until there are 5 members here.
very well.
It's become apparent that that's necessary to do.
Well, it would be. The purpose of having this meeting was to.
Right, and I'm fine going forward with that, but I have to advise you that I'm going to request a continuance, which I'm allowed to do
Well,
until
of course
there are
you-
5 voting members.
Of course you are, and I think that request would be granted. The question is whether we should proceed.
Oh, by all means, I think we should hear from Bob Kiani. He's made the effort to come into this meeting. I just wanted to make that statement, that's all.
Very well. Then, in connection with that simple question, and that's the way I see it. Maybe it's broader than that. We've asked Mr. Canning to come in and elucidate the efficacy of the different possible sewage disposal systems at this locus.
So, yeah, the difference in the
Yeah.
nutrient loading coming from a conventional system versus a system with IA over a period of 2 or perhaps a little more years until Paul Van Steensel would be able to tie into
Yeah,
the town store.
the real question here is, the legal question, was whether there was a sufficient financial hardship that outweighed the detriment to the environment as embodied in the present zoning bylaw. So, Mr. Canning, can you help us out? And
I don't know if I can help you out, but I will try. So, my name's Bob Canning, I'm the health agent in Orleans. I have maybe more than what you're looking for. I just had I've listened to a couple of meetings, you had another issue before you on nitrogen. I just thought maybe I could go over what the regulations that affect Orleans are with regard to nitrogen. Be very brief, but maybe clarify why is this, how are these tangled together, and how do they work together or not together? So if I may, I'll just give a brief overview of what we have for regulations concerning nitrogen in Orleans. Okay, and we'll get more specific after that. In Orleans, there are 3 regulations that affect nitrogen discharge. Okay, Orleans zoning bylaw, I'm counting that as one regulation, but there are 2 distinctive portions of the zoning bylaw that affect nitrogen. There is the Orleans Nutrient Management Regulations, which is Board of Health regulation, and then there is Title V, the State of Environmental Code. So all of them are distinctive, however, there is a lot of crossover. So I'm just going to go through my take on what the regulations mean on each one. So the Title V, they have nitrogen loading limitations for any system that is located in Zone 2 of the municipal well. And I'll clarify now, Zone 2 of the municipal well is the exact same demarcation as District 2 of the zoning bylaw. They're the same. Okay, so Title V says in a Zone 2 or nitrogen-sensitive area for property housing municipal, private well and a septic system, that they are limited to 440 gallons of effluent, 4 bedrooms, for 40,000 square feet. By the way, District 2 regulations say a property is limited to 440 gallons of effluent per 40,000 square feet. Okay, so they really, copy each other. District 2 regulations, with some exceptions, do not affect individual wells and private septic systems on the same lot. So there's a slight difference. I really just touched on the other part of the zoning bylaw, the groundwater discharge, or the groundwater protection districts. District 2, it's the same as Zone 2, 4 bedrooms per 40,000 square feet. Okay, you got Orleans zoning bylaw for apartment development. This is a little different. Okay, that is not going based on 4 bedrooms per 40,000 square feet. It's going on a discharge concentration. Okay, and it says that if you have more than 2 units per acre of buildable upland, the applicant must have the Board of Health certify that the septic system can achieve a nitrogen discharge of 19 parts per million or less. Okay, that bylaw encompasses the entire town, whether it's in District 2, any other district in town, village center, general business, anywhere, that regulation applies. And that has been applied to several properties throughout town. The 19 milligrams per liter generally has been calculated on a mass balance model. Okay. In Title V, though, the use here is based on performance of alternative septic systems. So you hear the phrase, and I'm going to use it from now on because it's too much of a mouthful to repeat, innovative alternative septic systems, or IA technologies. Okay, this is an add-on technology to a standard Title V septic system. This technology brings the effluent through nitrification and denitrification by running it through anoxic and anaerobic, back to anoxic conditions. Okay, that releases nitrogen off as nitrogen gas into the atmosphere, no longer discharged with the effluent into the ground. These technologies, as I said, are an add-on. Generally, it's the same septic system, basic Title V system with or without, and then you put this component somewhere in that system that does this job. The last regulation is the Board of Health Nutrient Management Regulations. To confuse things, this applies in every district of town but village center, industrial district, and with the exception of apartment buildings in the general business area. Every other aspect, every other part of town, including District 2/Zone 2, are subject to this regulation, which limits development to property to a ratio of 440 gallons per 10,000 square feet. So you could have a property in District 2 that wants 5 bedrooms. They would need relief from Zoning Board of Appeals, from Title V, and from the nutrient management regulations. Thankfully, it's all the same criteria. Okay, so you hear these. However, the nutrient management regulations go far beyond where the District 2 regulations and where Title V go. It is everywhere in town except for those exempt districts that I spoke about. Okay? The limit not to exceed 19 parts per million, again, based on technology performance. They go through a program where they have to submit their performance through testing, through pilot testing, through provisional use, and finally get as the technology that is being used on a proposal before the Board of Appeals. That has general use for nitrogen reduction. So that has gone through all the steps and has general use for nitrogen reduction. Okay, the proposal that you will not be hearing today is to the zoning bylaw, section 164-31, apartment development. That bylaw requires that any unit, any piece of property that has more than 2 apartments per acre for density has to put in a technology that will reduce the nitrogen to 19 parts per million. For clarification's sake, the project that you'll be hearing does not trigger Title V nitrogen regulations at all, does not trigger the Board of Health nutrient management regulations at all, and do not trigger the District 2 regulations at all. The only regulation it triggers is the zoning regulations for apartment development. So it's kind of, in this case, a standalone nitrogen-reducing area. In the case of 14 Cove Road, Board of Health had a presentation. The presenters came in, said they want to use this IA technology. It is capable and has state approval for 19 parts per million discharge. Board of Health accepted that, and that is their obligation under the zoning bylaw. You guys take it from there. But the Board of Health is comfortable that this technology can reduce to 19 parts per million if operated properly. So that's where the board comes from. Getting into what does all this mean on that specific piece of property. Cove Road discharges into Town Cove. Okay, Town Cove is in the Nauset Estuary. Okay, it has a limit on how much nitrogen it can accept. In fact, it is over that limit. 62% of the nitrogen has to be reduced in Town Cove. Okay. However, this project, taking into consideration of what the input is to Town Cove, I kind of broke it down. So if we go, the gallons per day are the same. And if you want, I have calculations that show this if you want me to pass those or if you just want me to talk.
You could talk.
I can talk, I guess I'm quite engaging. So.
I would accept a copy of any
Well,
kind of
okay.
chart you had, thank you. Mr. Marnick is much smarter than me and can follow this stuff.
All right, so. All right, do you want-
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There you go, thank you. Okay, what I just passed out is a nitrogen loading calculation. And this nitrogen loading calculation was done to determine pounds per year of nitrogen that would be discharged at 14 Cove Road. So if we could turn up in the right-hand corner, you have an A and a B. We can turn to page A. This is for 14 bedrooms in a 7-unit development. Total land area, 37,838 feet, square feet. Assumption, the paved area is 3,500 square feet. I don't know what it is. Roof area, I believe, is 13,458 square feet. And again, an assumption, 8,000 square feet of grass area, lawn area. Okay? Over to the right of where I just read, you're going to see another maroon number, 35. On this calculation, 35 parts per million is a discharge. Okay, that is a standard Title V system, no IA technology. Okay? If we go down to the bottom, it is calculated out in parts per million, and then kilograms per year, and pounds per year. I want you to understand the way that this calculation is done almost throughout Cape Cod is that you take an actual loading and you take a Title V loading. Title V assumes 2 people per bedroom, you have 8 people, or in this case, 4 people in a 2-bedroom unit. Okay, actual loading says it is 2.1 individuals per unit in Orleans. That's what we have for a occupancy. So when we calculate everything out and we take the mean number between actual loading and Title V loading, the difference is the occupancy. You can see it's highlighted in maroon and red. This property would project to discharge 136 pounds of nitrogen per year. Okay, so that's the important number. I'm going to switch to the other page. I'm just going to explain 2 areas to look. They're both highlighted in yellow. With an IA technology discharging at 19 parts per million, the mean pounds per year is 78 pounds per year discharged from the development at 14 Cove Road. So we have 136 to 78. By new math, I'd say it's like 52, 58 pounds per year difference. Okay, the reduction, almost 50% different having in the IA technology. Not quite, probably 40% difference. Okay, that's the difference between having IA technology and not having IA technology. All right. Any questions on this chart, minus my math?
Well, the basic question that I would ask basically is, okay, we're reducing, or potentially, we have a number of 58 pounds. What is that with respect to the amount of nitrogen that's going into Town Cove, independent of this, but from the rest of town?
I do have that.
Okay.
I just want to make sure everyone understands where we are on this balance, mass balance.
First of all, on title page A, you said that 136 is the mean, is between the Title V and the actual.
That's correct.
The actual is what?
The actual is an occupancy of 2.1
So that's
individuals
basically
per
town
unit,
standard
the
versus the
town
town.
average, yes.
So you call that the average, but it's the town's estimation of.
It is, right, the town's actual average occupancy per dwelling unit.
So,
Okay.
and that's the mean between the Title V and the town, the whatever the Title V was, 4 people per,
4 people per
and
bedroom.
now it's 2.1.
2.1 is our average. Okay, so we take the mean, we take the average of the 2 when we do this type of calculation. Okay? So that being covered, to Mr. Waugh's question, what does this mean for the town? Currently, the town cove is receiving an annual septic nitrogen load from septic systems, so this is not total nitrogen load. Annual septic system nitrogen load of 21,060 pounds per year. Okay?
And that's based on the actual rate.
Right, I got this from the town, the wastewater management study, and this is taking into account all the development at a 35 parts per million nitrogen discharge.
Based on the actual, the town standard, or the Title V.
This is actual, well, that's a good question. This would be, I don't know what standard they use. I would assume it's the mean standard because that is what is typically used.
You mean between the town and the...
In Title V, yes, that's an excellent question. They have calculated for the study purposes of wastewater management that there are 21,060 pounds per year discharged into town cove. Okay? If you go with no technology, okay, 136 pounds is 0.64% of the total nitrogen from septic systems going into town cove. So that's a standard Title V septic system. Okay? If you go to 19 parts per million, it goes down to 0.37% total nitrogen from septic systems going into town cove.
From all septic systems? From this
0.37 of all
particular?
nitrogen, septic system nitrogen discharge into town cove. Okay, the project on Cove Road is
Okay,
going to be 0.37%
thank you.
of what goes into town cove in its entirety.
That's with the difference between the IA and the non-IA.
Difference between the IA and non-IA is, in pounds, is going to be 58 pounds. And then the percentage is going from 0.64% with standard technology
2.37.
to 0.37 for IA technology.
So it's roughly, all of that, Mr. Canning, is 50%, give or take.
Thereabouts, 40,
Yeah,
50%.
all across the board.
Yep,
The IA system improves the numbers by 50%.
correct.
Okay, a couple of questions. The IA system is required by the zoning bylaw under the conditions of 2 units per acre. But the Conservation Commission imposes IA restrictions on other properties in town, doesn't it?
Board of Health,
Board of Health does?
yes. There's a Board of Health regulation, would not be under Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. They may recommend it.
In what circumstances does the Board of Health require IA other than the 2 units per
Okay.
acre?
All right, so quite often, it's through their nutrient management regulation, quite often you'll have someone come in that is, wants to have more than 4 bedrooms on an acre, okay, or 3 bedrooms on a half an acre. And the Board of Health is going to sit there and look at it. In fact, if it's under 40,000 square feet, they don't require a hardship, but you have to put in an IA technology and prove to the board's satisfaction that that IA technology for increasing 1 bedroom will reduce the total nitrogen to below what it is with the allowed number of bedrooms. Okay, so you're adding maybe a third, but you're reducing a half of the nitrogen. So it works out that going up 1 bedroom with IA technology is actually a reduction in the sewage. I want to make clear the nutrient management regulations is not there to be the solution to clean up the town's waters. It is there to control the increase in nitrogen going into these waters. But again, it has nothing to do with the project that the Board of Appeals is looking at is exempt because it's in a village center. So the Board of Health does not have a limitation on the amount of nitrogen or gallons of effluent that they could discharge on this particular piece of property. So the nutrient management regulations don't apply, neither does Title V for nitrogen sensitivity, and neither does the other section of the zoning bylaw for District 2.
So this project doesn't need your approval then for nitrogen loading?
Because the questions are tricky. It requires Board of Health certification that it will achieve 19 parts per million to satisfy the zoning bylaws requirement, so you guys can hear. Okay, they have to bring to you an approval from the Board of Health that this septic system can discharge 19 parts per million.
Okay, that's the predicate, and you've satisfied us of how you approach the Board of Health, how the Board of Health and you approach the situation.
Can I ask you a question, Michael?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Canning. That was really immensely helpful.
Oh, thank you.
We were shooting in the dark here because we didn't know the significance of the 19 and the 30, whatever. And having it translated as you have into percentages and pounds is exactly what we were looking for. But it still leaves us in the dark, or it leaves me in the dark, as to what the significance of this is. Is half of 1% a lot or a little in terms of our environmental concerns balanced against our desire to accommodate reasonable requests for variances and special permits by business owners and homeowners?
So, what you're dealing with is really 0.3%. That's the difference. Okay, so it's 0.3% that you're looking at. I can't advise you as to whether you feel that that is significant or not. Okay, you're adding to an estuary that amount that is going to an estuary that is receiving too much nitrogen today. It is already saturated with nitrogen and has to have nitrogen removed. You're also looking at a situation that in 4 years from now, there'll be zero septic nitrogen discharge. Okay, so I think the Board of Appeals really has to look at their, standard of review, or if that's what we call it. How does this apply, and can you fit the request into that to, make a decision?
Can you answer the question? You said it had no impact on the cleanup ultimately. It only had an impact on the ongoing accumulation and health, if you will. Is there a scheduled cleanup, and what's the status of that?
All right, so I have to,
If that's within
Speak.
our purview, that's...
Well, no, I think it's, we have an expert to maybe answer that question. I think it's of value, great value.
maybe an expert. But I guess I would answer it this way. When nitrogen goes into an estuary, okay, there are algae blooms and, other factors that happen to degrade the water. Understand that algae decomposes and floats in the bottom of Town Cove. That is there, and the nitrogen is contained in that. Okay, so that is going to be contributing until such time it's removed or flushes out, with currents. So I can't say to you that there is no impact, okay? But the second part of the question is, what is it going to bring in the future? Okay, when sewering goes in, okay, all the area being sewered, or this portion of what's contributing to Town Cove, don't forget, center of town is not everything that discharges. There will be zero input into the estuary. There will be zero input eventually into the estuary. The effluent has to travel through the groundwater, the nitrogen that's already in there. Okay, but you will no longer be contributing to the plume that's getting to the cove. And when that plume reaches in its entirety through the cove, then there'll be no nitrogen input from the septic system. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
What's interesting here is, of course, that this is the data we wanted. how we make the decision in the light of that still becomes very interesting, but we have the data that we
Right.
didn't have.
My thinking is that if any member of the board has questions of Mr. Canning, we'll ask Mr. Canning to respond, and we will continue this hearing to an appropriate immediate date, and I will circulate to the board a request of the absent members to attend, but that they should review the televised aspect of this hearing.
Can I ask one other thing? I think it would be appropriate, since Mr. Canning is here now, for the applicant or any member of the public to ask a question as well at some
That
point.
may be good, yes.
Could I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
We're going back to the 0.64% versus
Yeah.
0.37%.
Yes.
Those numbers are the difference in, what are those numbers?
Right, so the difference is, actually, I'm going to hand something out. I'll give this to you. So this is the best I could do, which is the best I can do.
We'll put a grade on it and get back.
Yeah, give it back, yes. Okay, the chart that you have is going through really a mass balance of nitrogen going into the septic system. And the factors that are in red are what really apply to the nitrogen being discharged through a septic system and the pounds of nitrogen that creates in a year. Okay? Understand in this, there is some nitrogen that comes in from, natural areas, roof runoff, etc. It's not exact because I don't have all the exact numbers. But it's consistent through the different parts per million. Okay? So I don't think that the actual numbers are making that big of a difference because I think the Board of Appeals is looking at the difference between 19 parts per million and 35 parts per million. Okay, so I'm off on the natural area or something, it's going to have little impact. Okay, so if we can go down under the chart, I have two comments. Currently, Town Cove is receiving an annual septic system nitrogen load of 21,060 pounds per year. The Nauset Estuary, which Town Cove is part of, is receiving an annual septic nitrogen load of 34,563 pounds per year. Okay, so those two numbers are constant through the next calculations. If we take 19 parts per million, which gives us 78 pounds of nitrogen per year discharged from the property through septic systems, okay, that equals 0.37% of the total nitrogen from septic systems into Town Cove. Okay? If we go to 19 parts per million, it is 0.22% of the total nitrogen from septic systems into the Nauset Estuary. All right? The next two numbers, 136 pounds, that's 35 parts per million, that is no treatment. Okay? And that is...
Well, it's Title V treatment.
Title V treatment, yes, no advanced treatment, thank you. 136.24 pounds, okay, is 0.6469% of the total nitrogen from septic systems into Town Cove. The 136.24 is 0.39% of the total nitrogen from septic systems into the Nauset Estuary. I did put in 45 pounds because some people argue that the nitrogen coming from septic systems with low flow toilets, etc., is 45 parts per million. Okay? Understand,
Low flow
however,
toilets are bad for the nitrogen discharge.
well, they're not bad for it, but they disguise it. Okay, understand that if you have a low flow toilet, okay, you're going to be drifting more towards the higher parts per million of effluent because you have less dilution. Okay, so it's really disguising what the real number is, and I didn't use it in my earlier discussion with the board because I think that if we stay with the 35 and the 19 and we go throughout, is really what you're looking for. And I think what the Board of Appeals is looking for is a difference between 0.37% and 0.64%, or the difference between 78 pounds of nitrogen and 136 pounds of nitrogen. I think those are the numbers that you're looking at.
That's representative, there's a value in the 21,000 pounds.
Yeah.
What's the 34,563 pounds? Is basically Town Cove considered part of Nauset Estuary?
Yes, yes.
So therefore, in fact, instead of going from .64 to .37, you're really going to half of that, approximately.
Mhm.
So the delta that you're looking for, or the amount of extra increase percentage-wise by this particular project, is probably going to be in the order of 0.2%. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
I just make, I make one comment, just feel like I have some input as to the buyers. Right, this is just a comment. So the data that the town provides is based on 2.1 occupants per bedroom.
Mhm.
That's fine. I
Per
reckon-
unit.
Per
Per unit, yes.
Right. If it's based on occupancy and the actual people that are living there, these are rated as two-bedroom units. We've already sold two. These are being purchased by retirees, two people who are going to stay here for 3 months, 4 months. So I'm not trying to influence the data, but if you do simple math, we're basically talking about half of these numbers, which again, I'm not trying to argue that you can't use this math, but from a common sense standpoint, we're not talking about a family of 4 living in a house for 12 months a year. We're talking about 2 individuals for 3 months who might have grandkids and, you know, their kids coming to visit for 5 weekends.
But I would like to make our case at a future meeting.
That's fine.
The other issue with what you just said, basically, on my information, is that if the system that is designed doesn't go to full capacity, then it is even further less effective in reducing nitrogen. So the fact that if you design it for 20 bedrooms at a certain flow, and you only wind up with half that number of, of flow, then basically you can almost double the nitrogen because it's not effective in removal. The fast systems just don't work.
You concur with that, Mr. Canning?
No, I know that there are some problems with people as they come and go. Clearly, when you have a big increase in flow, an immediate increase, the system has to adjust to that increase, and we'll have spikes, okay, in it. But Mr. Waugh is correct, it's designed for 1,500 gallons per day, okay? But I think the issue is making sure that the flows remain consistent. That goes in, and there's got to be good operation. There may be adjustments that have to be made from the summer flow to the winter flow in terms of, how, often in this place, the blower is always on, but, changing how they're going to maintain the system, adding a carbon source that may otherwise be missing in the wintertime. So they have to have someone who is actively working the septic system.
When the people come out and inspect those systems, 4 times a year, is it?
Typically, a board on this one required 4 times a year.
4 times a year. And when they do their evaluation, are they able to calculate the exact flow that's coming out of this, or?
No.
What do they do when they inspect those?
Well, they go through, first check all the components, make sure everything is functioning, make sure that there's no, buildup of a biomat on a filter or something that's going to be disadvantageous to the operation. They do check the quality of the water. Some are field tests. Others, like nitrogen, is a grab sample that they have tested at a laboratory. They do collect water meter readings, but it is not a daily water meter reading. At best, it's going, maybe now it'll be quarterly because people are being billed quarterly. But it has typically been every semi-annual, some people even annually, they'll calculate the effluent. So they go through everything, they submit the results, it goes to a database that comes to my office.
So how is the calculation of nitrogen per person determined? Just agreed
I think
upon?
it's 5.5, an average, 5.5 pounds of nitrogen per individual per year.
And where does that come from? Is that actually, that's a
That
agreed
is
upon,
it.
scientific, agreed upon
Again-
average?
You and I discharge differently. Okay, so this is a general average that is accepted in engineering practices. Okay, it is not, there's no way to say that everyone is going to be the same way, but a general average, and it's probably, collected from, larger source that, check for the flow and the number of people on it.
Right, now, in our actuals of 2.1, is that shared with the neighboring towns or Cape Cod?
It's an average individual to each town.
Individual each town, and do they
Yes.
vary?
I'm sure they do. I'm only familiar with Orleans, but I would imagine that some other towns, Dennis, Yarmouth, maybe more densely populated.
My point is, all this is very conjectural.
Mr. Tom?
I don't know whether this even fits in the parameters of what we do, but I think of Mr. Canning as an expert. And to the extent that he's an expert, I wonder if it's appropriate to ask him if he has an opinion to a reasonable degree of blah, 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 as to the impact in terms other than raw weight. And what makes that particularly interesting to me is if it's going to be cleaned up in 2 or 3 years, what's the big deal? But if it's going to accrue year after year after year, then it does, as a layperson, appear to me to have a significant difference. So my first question is whether it's appropriate to put such a question. I don't want to put Mr. Canning in an uncomfortable place, but I do think it's appropriate to ask him the question. And I defer to you.
I had understood that Mr. Canning would use a relatively broad brush in his offering to us. As it turns out, he has done much more than that. His calculations are specific and relate to the project that we're considering at this and the prior hearing. I don't doubt for a second that if we inquired that Mr. Canning would qualify as an expert. However, I think that the evidence that we've received entitles us to make our own decision without asking for this expert's opinion. But I'll ask for comments, that's my,
Let me be more
That's my-
specific. Let me be more specific. It's not yay or nay to the specific project. It's what is your evaluation of the actual impact? So we have these numbers. We don't know what more or less means, 2%, 0.2%. And so the question that I want to direct to the expert is it significant in your view, or is it insignificant?
any other member of the board have a thought on whether we ought to ask that opinion question of Mr. Canning?
I think it'll be up to Mr. Canning to make his own decision on the answer. We can ask the question and he can choose what he wishes to do.
Very well.
I agree completely.
In that case, I'll,
That you should not feel entrapped in having to provide an answer.
do you think you could pose the question so that, again,
Mr. Canning is an expert on nitrogen loading in the bodies of water that we're talking about, and with the data in front of you, to a reasonable degree of public health certainty, do you have an opinion as to the impact of this on the health of the estuary?
So the question is really the difference between 19 parts per million and 35.
Yes.
Correct.
Not the property incident.
Yes.
Correct.
I cannot tell the Board of Appeals, here's what you do. You have to understand that. So I'm going to ask you to, realize this area is exempt from the nitrogen loading regulations. They have freedom to do almost anything else on this property without considering nitrogen removing technology. They could come up with another flow that had, another use that has the same flow, and it would not fall under anyone's radar. Okay, so that activity is happening elsewhere in town, okay, where people are changing the flow and not being subject to nitrogen loading or nitrogen reducing technology.
So there's, how are people in town changing the loading without coming in for approval?
Well, if you remember, I brought up that Paul could build one building
Oh, I
with
see.
14 bedrooms in it, and he wouldn't have to have an IA component in the system. I think that's what Mr. Canning's alluding to.
Yes, there are other uses that can have a high flow, doctor's offices, restaurants, okay, have high flows per Title V, and all the flows we come up with, in our book are based on Title V. So there could be other uses that are there that would go unobserved. They would not be acted on by the Board of Health, Board of Appeals, or nitrogen removal. Okay, that being said, any nitrogen to a water body that is in excess of nitrogen is something you try to avoid. This will have zero nitrogen based on the vote next Tuesday, or Tuesday, okay? This will have no nitrogen in 3 or 4 years, okay? Mr. Van Steensel brought up a great comment, though we have no control over it. If the occupancy is seasonal, okay, you're not talking about reducing from 35 to 19, you're talking about reducing from 35 to 0, okay, for whatever period of time that the property is using. But that's out of our control. Anytime we regulate, we're regulating what the use can be, okay? And the other question I guess I could ask is if I said, I'm going to take so much of your pay and leave you with a small percentage, is that substantial? Okay? 0.2% is real, is that substantial? And that's really, I think, for the Board of Appeals to decide.
Can I ask one last question?
Yes, please.
Do you why is this in our court and not yours?
This is what town meeting voted. So this is a zoning bylaw that went to town meeting and was voted in. I think looking at the history of wastewater management in town, while these studies are going on, and I don't have the exact date that this was adopted, but I would imagine that it was adopted somewhere between the year 2000 and 2008, okay? And what was happening is that efforts are being made to take densely developed properties and try to control the increase in nitrogen, just as a nutrient management regulation does. Controls the increase in nitrogen. It's not stopping it, but it's saying, all right, if you're going to build to this density, okay, you have to meet this standard. And that was in the zoning bylaw brought forward by the planning board. So, and I'm fairly certain it was to reduce to control the increase.
So I understand that, but why, it should be in the health department's purview. Not ours. We're struggling with it. You have to bring you in here to illuminate,
Okay, if it wasn't a Board of Health's purview, it's exempt. Okay?
because of the.
Everyone has different reasons for different regulations, so, the reason why the Board of Appeals has it, that was decided by the planning board, it was decided by town meeting. This is what we want on a densely developed project. Okay, and they wanted it to be controlled. Town meeting cannot tell the Board of Health what to do. So
Right.
they told the Board of Appeals, the planning board, that we were accepting your proposal, we voted it in, we think it's right, and then the variances fall to you. Okay?
Yeah, but don't forget, this was approved initially, basically stating that the developer can comply with the requirements, which they did. Okay, now they're saying they don't want to comply. So that's why it's a variance. They're doing something that's anti-regulation, so it becomes a variance under that criteria.
Yeah, it's artificially, to my mind, artificially a variance of zoning, it's a variance from the health department.
You got a valid point, but I'm just saying that's why you're here.
Oh, I understand that, I know why we're here, I just understand the reasoning behind why it's here and not there. That's what I was trying to get at. I understand why it's here, but
Are there any further questions?
Help me?
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Canning.
Oh,
We
thank you.
appreciate your help.
Hope I answered
I'm
your
going to
questions.
receive your calculations as part of the record in this case.
I did see those in to the clerk, so.
I'd like to thank Mr. Canning as well. I thought that was very illuminative. Thank you very much.
and interesting.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
I've never heard anyone talk about nitrogen as being interesting.
I found it to be very interesting.
But it is, all joking aside, and I do like to joke, this is such a big issue for the town. And I think it's seen because nitrogen controls show up in different regulations. Okay, and they show up in different regulations because this has been a huge topic for the town since probably the late 1990s. And these were ways of dealing with it. Hopefully, with a good vote on Tuesday, okay, it'll be controlled in a final sense. Everything we're doing today is not a final sense. Whether it's 35 or 19 parts per million, okay, you're adding nitrogen to an estuary that cannot take the nitrogen. It is not a final solution. And I think that listening to the tapes of the meeting which brought me here, I think that was, their point. That the final solution is coming, and I think that's what's frustrating. The Board of Health has been dealing with this, with their regulations, just not in this particular zone, okay? And it's very difficult, and it's, tough. In fact, we have asked that transition rules be written. Maybe the Board of Appeals want to jump on that. Transition rules be written. That will get us from where we are today to where we'll be on sewers, and come up with, some type of agreement that, everyone feels comfortable going forward with.
Alternatively, we just torture all applicants and it deters them.
Yeah,
So,
I think that, though, causes torture on yourself too, though. I've seen it with the Board of Health. It is a very, very difficult decision because we're talking about someone putting out money. Okay, it's not a final solution, but it is a requirement. For the Board of Health, this is not the Board of Appeals. They're wrestling with the standard of review says, and yet someone's coming in and not meeting the standard of review. But as you are, you're sitting there saying, doesn't make sense not to enforce the regulation. It's tough. It's not nothing clear cut on it. So.
Well, isn't the other issue that a Title V system does not remove nitrogen? It's basically a hydraulic guarantee that a system is going to work.
Well, Title V does remove nitrogen, but not a great amount. Okay, so there is some nitrogen removal from effluent going into the tank versus effluent going into the groundwater. So there is anaerobic and aerobic cycles in there.
Sludge.
But it is not it is not substantial. The technologies are the answer to that.
Right.
Because they mechanically, okay, some passively, are just dealing with the nitrogen. So,
Your Wise Living gets theirs down to 5 ppm.
Wise Living, I would say, is beyond denied aid technology.
Mm.
They have, that's really a treatment facility operated, to a high detail, very high detail, and they get great results.
Mhm.
thank you.
All right, thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, Bob.
I'd like to continue it to the, assuming we'll have a quorum in a couple of weeks, I'd like to continue it to.
The next regularly scheduled meeting, I don't know whether
Well,
we're
when the
in.
next regularly scheduled meeting.
We don't have anything for the fifth, so it would be the 19th. notices for the 5th? As of yet? Or as of last week, which was the deadline?
We don't need to publish again on this one.
I move we continue this to the 5th.
Why don't we do that? And the Nelson, the two Nelson
I
cases.
just
All right,
submitted a letter requesting a
very well. That will constitute our agenda. The request to extend the termination dates of those two special permits.
Thank you very much.
And then this,
Great, thank you.
okay?
I just ask for clarification, if there's less than 5 members voting, you need 100%, is that correct?
That's right. You need all
Whereas
four.
if you have 5 members voting, you can have 2 dissents.
No.
You would have
one.
One.
Only one,
Yeah.
has to be 4 to 1
Right, but
still.
The voting, only 5, and the chair generally designates the 5.
Yes, but,
But you need 4.
so you still need 4, but you
Right.
can have 1
And-
dissent.
and-
Okay.
And when that's done, my practice to remind the public is that all members have the ability to examine and comment even if they don't vote. Then we have a motion to adjourn.
No, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
I just like to know, I couldn't find on your website, I'm curious to know when the Beth Bishop Appeal special permit is.
Oh, I had someone call from Saratoga Springs this week to me, and that,
Was it a jockey?
the applicant, called, what, Bluefish Outfitters, I think was the name, yeah, they withdrew their application.
Altogether?
Yes, without prejudice. The thinking was that they would redo the whole application, and seems to me there was some talk about working out a landscaping plan. I don't know that, for all practical purposes, that application is,
Is off your table?
right, it's inactive.
Oh, because
It's gotta be,
I followed one of your meetings, and I thought it had been rescheduled to another time. In fact, I thought it was tonight, but
I think it was a lot of street talk about the timetable, that was it was left open from December or January, and then it was never placed back on the agenda. Finally, I put it on the agenda because I was reading reports that the zoning board ought to be more diligent in riding herd on it. So at that point, the applicants,
thank you very much.
that's it.
That was a nice meeting, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, thanks for
being
coming
here.
in.
Glad somebody did.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
We don't.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Uh,
Thank you, everyone.